So my name is Keziah, and I am the creator of Conscience, which is a podcast series that talks about the UK migration crisis. And each track discusses different issues on the subject matter and voices differing opinions about it. And this episode is a bonus episode that kind of ties all the tracks together, in which I discuss with Identity International the effects of migration and the reasons in which I decided to create our podcast. So I'll hand it over to them.
I think this also ties in nicely with a lot of the stuff we've been working towards as well. Amplifying voices of marginalised people and minority mental health, which is something that I've been focusing on in the past month as well. And a lot of that is affected by migration, naturally. Like, a lot of us are children of immigrants, and the whole Brexit policy has also had a huge psychological impact on how we feel in Britain too.
If you were to describe the 3 take-home points from the episodes you've done so far, what would they be?
Ooh, I don't know. So many episodes are so varied, as I told you guys about before, and there are so many points. I can't say there's one episode where I didn't learn. As I said earlier, I really regard myself as a well-spoken person, but you speak about an issue enough to just a vast amount of people, and you start to think that what you knew is only a small fraction of what you should know, of what there is to know out there, of all the knowledge available out there. I think the three that really struck out to me in terms of taking away and adapting it individually and adapting it on a wider scale in life, it would definitely be because on my podcast, everyone gets different questions about migration. The only one question everyone gets at the end of the podcast is how to solve the migration crisis. And I think one of the first one, the one that sticks out to me that had me shaking, was read. That was one of the answers one of my interviewees gave, to read. And it blew my mind because it's so simple and it's such a blatant answer. You would think everyone reads, but really people don't. Because it's not just reading to keep yourself informed. It's not just reading so that you know what's going on in the wider world. But as the individual suggested, read fiction written by migrants. Read why it is that they strive so much to make it to the West. Read where they come from and the obstacles that they face. Because if you're reading, it allows the ability to process feelings other than just your own. And even if you're a person who wouldn't consider yourself as compassionate, you cannot help but feel something towards just these mesmerizing tales written by these people who came seeking better. I think the second takeaway was that the word immigrant should be associated, even if most of the time it's not, but it should be associated with hope. The whole ideology or the whole idea behind immigration is people seeking better, regardless of where you were born, regardless of your citizenship, regardless of where you started. There's no one in the world who can say that they never, at any point in their life, strived, considered, or wanted to create or to achieve or obtain more or better than the circumstances they were in. So that's definitely my second takeaway. And the third one was, what would the third one be? Antoine, there were some really incredible takeaways, but I think the third one that I would take away is that history is something that we should be acknowledged more. One of the questions I do ask on one of the tracks of the podcast was that in terms of the UK's migration problem, shouldn't we as the UK be stepping in earlier when we see other nations and they're going through civil war, where they have infighting between the government and militias, where they have economic collapse or they're starting to fall into economic collapse? Isn't it at that point that we should be going in and aiding them to then prevent the result, which is the migrant crisis of people fleeing their nations because of uncertainty, because of circumstances there, to try and make it in the UK? And the individual in this particular track said something that I think maybe it is known to everyone else, but to me it really, really spoke to me, which was that you don't have to look too far in history to see that when the West intervened, sometimes, most of the time, majority of the time, that intervention does more harm than it does good, because there's a very, very thin line between going somewhere to help and going somewhere to hinder under the guise of help. And is in our very recent history that you can see where this happens, where the West intervened and it helped, and where the West intervened and it was marketed as helping, but actually it was a hindrance. So I think, if anything, those are the three most powerful takeaways I took. Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of what you've stated. I mean, the latter point, at least, is a lot of what the post-colonial movement is trying to, highlight, is the fact that when you study not even history or present, and you put modern phenomena such as the international, or if you put things like the UN even into, under this sort of magnifying glass, and you look at them and see how they protect certain political and economic interests for certain nation states who, have a historic root in colonialism and exploitation of these, of these countries. And if you look at them, it's as simple as looking at World War One, right? And then the Sykes-Picot, and how the Middle East has been, cut up into these nation states according to a French and a Englishman, and what they thought was, the best way to kind of carve these nation states out of the region. And then you see how that plays out into the modern day discourse. A lot of people forget, how a lot of what we have today is built on a lot of turmoil, and it still has been maintained, if not, to sort of sustain more liberal, more like neoliberal and capitalist agendas within the region. And a lot of people don't realize this, and you don't realize what what are supposed to be objective organizations that aren't supposed to have any bias, such as the UN, but they do ultimately, because of issues such as the R2P, which is the right to protect, right? And you have the right to protect is a UN legislation that allows other countries to get involved and mess with the sovereignty of another nation state, which one of the products of that, you would say one of the huge products of that is the migrant crisis. Because you are getting involved in the sovereignty of another state, you are ultimately producing migrants who are trying to flee these states because of the havoc that you caused through the wars, or even just impoverishment that you caused. It doesn't necessarily have to be the fact that these migrants are fleeing from war. It could be because the economic standards of these nation states are, by comparison to what Western states are, at least are close to nothing. Where majority of these people do live under poverty. And it's interesting because it doesn't take, and like you said, it doesn't take a lot of reading. You don't have to do that much reading. It is just listening about the stories of what forefathers have been through to know that it's just a continued process even into the modern day, and what is happening at the moment in the Middle East, or even in Africa, or in most of the what would be known as the quote unquote the global South.
I think also so much of the discourse about this is migrants are invading, or there's not this understanding that there's this back and forth that's always been going on. Europe's always been involved in these countries in general, and it's not just people invading these countries, but that is what is that's what you hear in the media all the time. They talk about migrants like it's a disease, literally it's some infectious disease.
No, I agree, because it comes up a lot during the podcast of why is it that there's this perception in the media, and especially towards the way in which Brexit was campaigned, that a vote for Brexit is a vote for keeping sovereignty. It's a vote for making sure that we don't have any more migrants coming into our nation. It's a vote for making sure that we maintain control over our borders. And a lot of the time, migrants, immigrants, people who are asylum seekers, they're often portrayed in the media like as you said, invaders, that they're coming into this land to do this, to steal this, to take that, to cause this. And you often wonder, where does that come from? What makes people think? What makes people think, or what guides people towards these mindsets that, you know, immigrants, migrants, they're all coming to steal jobs, they're all coming to use benefits, they're all coming to cause disorder and disruption and violence, and coming to be affiliates of criminal organizations. Where does this propaganda, so to speak, originate from? And what is the responsibility of the media, because they are the ones who proliferate it a lot of the time. And so it then becomes a back and forth conversation between, where does it come, where do you draw the line between reporting, sensationalizing, and pushing an agenda? Because the imbalance, we've all seen it, between the three, but where do we really draw the lines? And to whom should those lines be drawn? Like, who should be holding the checks and balances with these things? Because when you really look at it, and you need to look no further than the UK, you need to look no further than the year of Brexit, when the UK first voted for Brexit, to see that the checks and balances they're not held by anyone.
I was just going to say, even now, even though Brexit happened, you know, the whole voting of Brexit happened a few years ago, but even if you look now with COVID, so many people, like on social media, I've seen, especially on Twitter, when it comes to talking about COVID and borders, you know, a lot of people come up and say, how come you didn't close the borders, you know, when it comes to migrants? How come we didn't close it now, but then now you want to close it for COVID? Like, you know, they always compare it to that. And it's just crazy to think that even through a global pandemic, they're still thinking about closing borders to avoid migrants coming in. They don't want people to come in and infect and give more COVID to other people, you know? So it's interesting to see that even now, in a global pandemic, that's still so many people's like discussion, and so many people's priority is still migration. So it's just crazy, really, to think about.
No, it really is. It never seems to really go from the recess of people's minds. There's just other periods when it's kept at bay. For instance, I could say there was not a lot of sensationalization about it in the UK, or reporting of it, not quite as much coverage in 2020, because we were going through a global pandemic. So it's not to say that that problem has gone away, or that mindset has gone away. It's just been hushed because another worry has taken its place for now. But once that worry is controlled, or, you know, taken care of, you'll see that that mindset hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there on the forefront of people's minds. And it's, for lack of a better word, it's sad. Because really and truly, what you gain from the immersion of different cultures and different people is more than what you lose. But this is, again, debated on the podcast, because the thing when it comes to migration and immigration, in the forefront of every nation's mind is, what can you give to me? What economic value, what value, if any, can you give to me? And I often wonder, can a person not seek a better life if they have no worth, if they have no value to contribute to? Can existing and breathing and paying taxes not be a value? Will it always have to be, they have to be a prodigy, or some, you know, some kind of millionaire, or have some kind of financial stake to put into the nation before the nation then opens their arms and say, of course you can pursue a better life? Can't you pursue a better life for just being, just existing and just being?
Well, I mean, in terms of, it was very interesting a couple of weeks ago, actually, when I was talking to a friend of mine. And he said that at his workplace, they literally referred to human beings as resources. And I was like, that's not really, it sounds shocking, right? But then think of it, all of our workplaces have a human resource department. So this isn't something exclusive. It's the entire human resource department that we have. And this is on a micro level, on an individual level, where I think subconsciously we are seeing human beings as resources, and that puts their value down to their productivity, their efficiency, what you would attain, you know, the sort of characteristics of what a resource is meant to be. And this is exactly the way that the migrant discourse within the political sphere is going as well, with Priti Patel and what she's recently said about there being that system about, you have the grading system. I've forgotten what it's exactly called, but you basically get points, and the points are based upon your economic value. What added benefit can you give and it doesn't really matter where you're from, what added benefit can you give to our economy? And if you have no benefit to our economy, then you do not deserve the right to citizenship to the UK. And whether we like it or not, I think we need to sort of reflect back on this on a micro level as well, on an individual sort of relationship, right? When we're hiring people or when we're looking for jobs, there's a lot more than, a human being than just being a resource. And this mentality, I feel like, is being more and more solidified because it's so prominent on a micro level that we don't really, and when we see it play out on a major level, then we're shocked. But we don't realize how it's on a day-to-day basis, right? As to like how human beings are devalued or are seen, as to how like are measured based on their value, what productiveness and efficiency and all these sort of, this is where I'll be an anti-capitalist, but this is what, I personally, at least from what I've experienced, see it as a byproduct of capitalism, where making money and gaining capital is the main objective, right? And and the individualism that comes about it as well. And the first thing that you'll hear in this is from another person when you talk, they're taking our jobs. Right. And it becomes, they're taking our jobs. That's the first thing. When you ask somebody as to why you don't want migrants in the country, a lot of the time you will hear they're taking our jobs.
And benefit thieves, they're taking
right.
benefits,
Right. But and it becomes a political scapegoat. And politicians, you might call it pragmatism or so, but a lot of politicians will feed onto that discourse and will say that we need to stop these migrants from coming in, and it'll become a political basically a scapegoat. Migrants will become that scapegoat, and it creates that othering within society where migrants are placed as a dichotomy between, and placed into this economic context, and then you dehumanize them by default because of that, and that ultimately leads to why you have such a prevalent view within society, and you have people voting for governments and people in power that will, and things like Brexit, where you think automatically they'll save you from getting more people and coming in. Because if I'm going to be more sympathetic and understanding of a human being, and if I'm having a hard time struggling getting a job, which is a lot of the case, unemployment is high, and a lot of people are struggling. A lot of people, British sort of natives, are struggling, and this is why I think a lot of second generation migrants also feed into this discourse, because they're struggling to find jobs as well, and they think they need to close the borders, because I'm sure all of us have that one relative that believes that there shouldn't be any more migrants coming into the country, and then they don't.
That's really interesting though. I do not understand why that happens.
But this is it. And you try and think into it, and it's like they're struggling 9 times out of 10 to either make money or get a job, and they think the reason for that is because there are more people coming into the country, and it's because our politicians use that as a scapegoat. There's a lot of I'm simplifying and reducing a lot of this. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated, but a lot of the time, that's the mentality that I come across, is where, because politicians blame the migrants, that, unemployment is high because all the migrants are taking jobs, which is not true. Anybody that looks into our economy and sees where public spending is going into and where taxes are being used to bail out big corporations and, other companies and stuff, and going into the pockets of our MPs half the time, you can easily poke holes into that narrative. But again, I think this is where you were right, Keziah, and it comes back to that point that you made in the beginning about reading being very important.
Reading, absolutely, yeah. Keeping yourself informed. But then again, as we explored in that conversation with my interview, with the person I interviewed, it was that it comes down to you as an individual, because there are a really vast number of people who just don't want to know. That's why they don't read. They just don't want to know. It's only, I wouldn't say a select few, but it's not as many as you would think in a Western part of the world where news is so accessible. In fact, they have so many publications of newspapers around the UK that are completely free. There's absolutely no excuse if you want to, on any level, if you want to keep yourself informed, if you want to look into this, if you want to know where like the truth lies. And even in another episode, one fantastic suggestion was that people could just Google it. Like, if you don't want to read, you don't want to be learned, you could just Google it. There are statistics on all this stuff. There's always that narrative, oh, migrants are coming to steal our jobs. Google it. Someone will have done the statistics and you'll be shocked. You'll be shocked to find that that's not true. Oh, but they all come and they cause like crime and disorder. Google it. There will be a statistics on that too. You'll be shocked to find that, again, that's not true. Oh, but really, they're just stealing all our jobs. They're just using benefit fraud and this and that. Google it. Someone has also done a statistic on that. Amazing. Like, how more simple can you make it? It's not even that you have to pick up the paper, comb through the lines and read it. You can just Google it. Even if you're too lazy to Google, you could talk into your phone and your phone will Google it for you. There is little to no excuse as to why a person can't keep themselves informed unless they, as an individual, just don't want to. Yeah.
And I think that is the case. Most of the time, people have already made up their minds and they don't want to learn, they don't want to know, and they'd rather just not, because even when you see an argument on social media, and even if someone's pulling up facts, the other person who's against it will still think of an excuse to, back up their mentality about it, and they just don't want to learn. And I think that's the problem, is that there is so much information to access through Google, through reading, but when someone's made up their mind, a lot of them are not going to change it. Because
why? I mean, I would want to see everybody's opinion on this. Why do we think that is? Like, why is there this lack of? I don't think, because I can't say that everybody's lazy.
No, it's not lazy though. I think it's because people don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be proven wrong. That's what it is.
Yeah, and also there's enough people that believe it for people to feel justified, no matter what other people say. They'll be like, well, everyone around me agrees with me, and the media agrees with me, and this paper said this, so I'm right. I think it comes down to that as well.
It's interesting because you, Keziah, go first.
No, I think it's all of that combined, but in my personal take on it is comfort. I find that people are very comfortable to believe lies, and people are very comfortable to believe things that they've heard regurgitated enough times. But when you look into something and you find out the truth, it makes people really uncomfortable. And seeing like the horror and the shock of what it is that a lot of these migrants have to endure and what a lot of them go through, when you really get into those details, it makes you very uncomfortable. So rather than look for the truth, rather than pursue knowledge of what is going on, you just stay comfortable, I would argue.
It's sad because it's such a privileged thing to just sit and say like, oh, this is a problem, these migrants are taking our jobs, when you're so removed from that experience of being a migrant or having family who are sort of migrant. As children of immigrants, we're a bit more like aware of this stuff. And that's why, going back to what Misbah was saying earlier as well, like it really does get to me, like when I see other sort of ethnic minorities out here talking about migrants being a problem, and like you said, there are a few people in my family like that too, and I really don't understand like how you're not even that far removed from the experience. Like, it's, if anything, you're so close to it, you've got members of your family going through this stuff, and you can still sit there and be like, it's a problem in this country. And that's really dangerous, and that's something that really, like, I find really scary, because then it just gets to a point where it's like, if we're not speaking out for ourselves and our own people, it's harder to then expect people who are even further removed to care about this stuff.
No, absolutely, you're really right in saying so. Yeah,
I was going to say, it kind of goes back to individualism. Like, we're living in this time where everyone's just thinking about themselves, and that's not to say that's a bad thing. It's good to think of yourself and put yourself first at times, but I think it's reached this point where people, as blunt as it sounds, some people just don't care. They know what migrants go through. They know the struggles they go through, but some of them just don't care, and it's sad to put it that way, but that's just how some people think. And I'm not saying that's everyone, but some of them are like that. And actually, I was talking to someone a while ago, and we were having this sort of discussion, and they were just saying, like, they grew up somewhere where it was just all white people, and a lot of them were poor, you know. And if you were to go up to them and say, like, we should let migrants in because of this, this, and this, they just be like, I don't care, because I have my own issues, I have my own problems, I don't have a job, I'm living in poverty, that's not my main priority, I'm thinking about myself. So I think in some cases that's the kind of mindset a lot of people have as well, which contributes to what's happening.
And then you can see why they'd get triggered by headlines saying stuff like there's migrants invading and they're taking the jobs,
they're stealing your jobs. Yeah,
struggling so much already. It's just, and I think also, like, COVID's been really interesting, like you were saying as well, Pinez, because I think infectious diseases in general has always been interesting with borders and the way they try to then control populations because of that. And I do think that, like, COVID, like, maybe even after, when the pandemic calms down, this will definitely be an agenda for having tighter sort of migration control and restrictions. And it's kind of sad to even think of how people who've been sort of migrating over this time, or, you know, like undocumented migrants, what their experiences may have been during sort of the COVID crisis as well, and how they've been treated.
No, most definitely. I think one of my favorite episodes in the podcast, I have a representative from a firm that advocates for undocumented migrants during the crisis, because there are so many cases in which undocumented migrants have died from corona because they were so fearful of being deported if they sought after medical attention, that they rather would stay on their own and bear the burden of COVID, to the point of where it gets so bad that they pass away from it. And it's horrifying to think that that has to be a choice in this modern world for anybody, that it has to come down to that, deportation or surviving. It is absolutely insane. But it's really, really interesting, because there are a lot of studies that show that BAME people have been impacted, the impact on COVID of people from ethnic minorities, the disproportion between it and people of, let's say, Anglo-Saxon descent is really, really, really mind-boggling. And then obviously you have, when it comes to immigration and migration, those who are undocumented. And you would think that at this time, when it's a disease and a crisis that affects everybody, regardless of documentation or not, they're still a person. They still are. They can still, it is a human right that they can still be, not just if you really don't care about them as an individual. Well, think of it on a wider scale. Everywhere they go, everyone they interact with is then put at risk. And then you're just spreading it. So if for nothing at all, if not for compassion, if not for you caring on any level, at least make it accessible to them, just so that we can quell the crisis. And even in times like this, no, there is no resource available for people who are undocumented in which they can be guaranteed to be treated and not then prosecuted or deported or fined. And is terrible that anyone should have to come down to thinking like that and lose their life because these resources, which are, as you so rightly pointed out, human rights, are not made available for them. And
I think that's so interesting as well, because that change in the NHS occurred before sort of the pandemic. And I kind of remember, like, it was really big, the whole patients not passports thing, and a lot of doctors were like really mad about the fact that it was now like in law that as a doctor you had to check a person's migration status before being able to give them any medical or clinical help, even if it's an emergency. And it already affected so many sort of pregnant women who then were like too scared to get help and then ended up dying, or like trying to do home labors and it really getting botched up. So it's like all these things that were happening before COVID, which naturally, when I think this pandemic in general, it just like exacerbates already existing inequalities. And something that really like wound me up with the way that the whole BAME suffer from COVID more sort of narrative is like the way it was kind of said in a way that like it's a genetic disposition that we have as ethnic minorities, which is basically leading this pandemic and leading the rise in cases in the UK, and that it's not actually because of like structural discrimination that we face on every level, which means that we're just marginalized within the country.
No, I agree. It is. And that is, again, as we said earlier, is the checks and balances of these people who are reporting it, is the way they do it. It's them, the difference between sensationalizing, pushing an agenda, and just telling the facts and the truth. Yeah.
I think it's just sad. It's just like, it's really heartbreaking because you just see how much these people are suffering as well. And then on top of that, there's all this news and these headlines. And then obviously a lot of the work I've been doing over the past month is always about like the mental health repercussions for that as well. And it's like ethnic minorities have also been suffering terribly mental health wise during this pandemic and this crisis. And it could be from a range of things, based from COVID to like migration issues that their family members might be facing too, or personally as well, which just isn't, I feel like it's not given enough attention.
No, not as much as it needs to be, not at all. Yeah. Ladies, I would love to put it to you in your personal opinions. And if you have an answer, it's perfectly fine if you don't, because there are some people who don't have an answer. What, in your personal opinions, is the solution to the UK migrant crisis?
It's hard.
It's a difficult one, because I think in my podcast, I never tell anyone the questions in advance. It's only on the, like, when we get down to it, I start by saying, okay, the last question is the one I give to everyone, but that's the one I give to everyone because I want raw, brutal truth. And it's funny because some people have, like, they're ready to go. They fought this all day long, and there are others who are like, I've never even stopped to consider it, let alone have a solution to it. So just take a moment if you need one, and let me know, what do you think is the way forward? I
think for me personally, I think I see a lot of misinformation and kind of sad things you see on social media, and I think media obviously is bigger than it's ever been in this day and age, and it contributes so much to what people think of other people, of otherness, of migrants. And I think some sort of regulation when it comes to the media, whether that's social or, newspapers and news channels overall, some sort of regulation is required to stop the spread of misinformation, because that's what I think, misinformation is something that scares people the most, and it sensationalizes things. And for me, I think media is like the number one place to, I think they have so much power, and if they use it correctly, or if there's some regulation on it, it can change a lot of things. It can change a lot of perspectives when it comes to migrants. So I think, for me, regulation of media.
No, I think that's a fantastic one. That hasn't come up yet in any of my podcasts, but I do think it's a fantastic one, because as you so rightly say, they wield so much power. The ability to change and reorder people's mindsets just through a sentence or a word or just a headline is incredibly powerful. So to think of what it would be like, or what kind of world we'd be living in if they really had some type of regulations in place, it's a really bold one, a really bold world we'd live in. Yeah.
I do think also not only regulation, but more representation when it comes to film and TV shows as well, because at the end of the day, a lot of people don't want to read or don't want to chase things up, but if they watch a show they really like, or if they watch a movie they really like, and there's a character in there that's gone through something like this before, they might be able to feel it better when they relate to the character, or when they see them in a show they really like, a movie they really like, and it might change their perspective like that more. It might make them want to chase things up more. It will bring up more conversations on social media, which will, especially for the next generation, they will grow up seeing more discourse about this kind of stuff. And I think even representation in media is so important. So I think media overall for me. So yeah.
No, media is a great one. And Neelam and Misbah?
Do you want to go first?
Nah.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing that I read a while back, actually, whilst I was still studying, was there was this thing about Britain and in India and Pakistan, and how during the time of Pakistan being created, there was a reform in the education system under the British Raj, where a dichotomy was presented within the education system. And it was subtly done and injected into your social studies classes and your history classes, where you started to present a certain narrative to the children that were being brought up to create an opposition between Hindus and Muslims, which never existed beforehand, because those, Hindus and Muslims had lived side by side for centuries beforehand. It wasn't that they used to all of a sudden started hating each other, or these are like deep-seated hatred that, had existed for centuries. No, it was something that was introduced into the education system. And this has not only been done, that's one example. This has been done on multiple levels, in different sort of scenarios within, the modern nation state system that we're living in at the moment. And I think that's a very powerful way of creating social change, is having educational reform, where educational syllabi include children to not only critically think what they're fed through the media and their politicians, because I'm thinking more realistically, people that are trying to aim to gain power within the world that we live in, especially the scenarios that we live in, they have control over our education system at the moment too. And, but I would ideally start from educational reform, where teachers start implementing these into their syllabuses, into their classes, where they get children to think about these things. I don't mean a show and tell session where you bring in a news article, which a lot of us, I think, must have done during our high school or even primary school periods. But actually bring it into a syllabus where you get people to think more and not just read for 10 minutes. Keziah, I'm sure you've seen this because you've been working in the school system as well at the moment, where you get children to sit down for 10-15 minutes to read a book, right? And reading is, yes, very important, but I do think we need to teach kids how to read. Not necessarily what to read, but how to read, how to critically analyze things that they're being fed, so that when they are bombarded with headlines about, migrants being seen as invaders or aliens, they question those headlines. And we live in a so-called democracy, but I do think that's how we're going to get actual social change, is where you start to reform that. Where you get the people, and the power lies within the people, and that's something. That's something that I've come across in a lot of the beyond conflict issues as well, where people ask for solutions of the conflicts as well. And a lot of the academics and the social journalists and the people that I've spoken to, they've always said the power always lies in the hands of the people. It doesn't matter what the governments do. And I think the way that we can gain that power back as people is to educate our youth and educate the people that, even if it's the school system, maybe outside of the school system, parents and family members strike up this type of a discourse more, and we create that educational reform within our own households if we can't do it on a more institutional or systemic level, like within schools. Or even programs where, we start going into schools and talking to kids. I do think that will be met with a lot more opposition, actually, because I think that causes more change than, just trying to control. I believe I'm very much of a grassroots person. I always believe in bottom top of an approach when it comes to actual societal reform. And I think getting kids to think about these things would definitely, and it's not going to be an immediate change. It takes decades to bring about that reform, but it is one of the more sustainable ways that I think we can create a change in the society that we're living in at the moment.
No, I can't fault you in it at all, because it's just, again, I feel so naive, because it's just like, I even work in education, and yet have I ever sat there and thought, man, I should be teaching these children how they should read? Absolutely not. Furthest thing from my mind. But it's such a powerful instrument and such a powerful tool, because as a child, if you are taught that skill set to question what you're reading, to challenge what you're reading, to look into what you're reading, don't just read it and regurgitate it, don't just read it and keep it locked in your mind, but think in a broader context of it. No one can fool you when you're a 20-year-old, when you're a 30-year-old, when you're a 40-year-old, and you have the power to vote, when you have the power to challenge or voice things on any platform at any stage, no one can then dissuade you or try to throw smoke and mirrors at you, because you know what to look for, and you know how to analyze it and how to break it down to find its roots of whether it is true or it is biased or it is completely false. So no, I think that one is also a really, really great and a really, really powerful way to affect change. Yeah, and to solve the migrant crisis. I do. And Neelam, your solution?
I still don't really know. I wouldn't have a real solution. I think like what both Peniz and Misbah have said are really important. And for me personally, I think it's just been, there just needs to be enough people who care enough to carry on talking about this and carry on making an impact about this. And that's where it comes on all of us to do the most we can to educate people, to inform people, to try and have these discussions more, and, you know, on social media, educating people on this stuff too, because so many people just don't know enough, and so many people are too busy and struggling too much on their day-to-day lives to be thinking about this stuff. But I think it's so scary, because even when it's like said in a way where it's a migrant crisis, it makes you think there's this massive problem that we have to deal with, when really it's not. It's just about being a decent human being to another human being who, just, if you were in their position, you would want a better life too. And just
absolutely, yeah. No, I think I can't agree with you more, because it's true. I just feel like what is missing in the ongoing conversation with migration, immigration, asylum seeking, is that thought process that their people, your people, if you were in their circumstance, would you not want better? Would you not want more? Would you not do everything in your power to ensure that your family, that you yourself were safe, were put in a position where you could have more than nothing? Because a lot of them, what they're fleeing from, what they're trying to elevate themselves from, is not that, you know, they were living some kind of working class life and they were like, you know what, this is just not it. That is the case for some people. That's not to say that never happens, but a lot of the people who are seeking asylum, who are going on these journeys that no one should go on these unseaworthy vessels, in these conditions that, you know, will kill you if you really read about them. No one is doing this because they're just dissatisfied. They're doing it because they're trying to elevate themselves from nothing. What crime is there in that, or what's so wrong about doing that? Not saying that, you know, I'm here, but I want to be even higher up, but saying I have nothing, like this is as low as I can go, and I just want a bit more. I don't see why that is something that has to be tied up in bureaucracy, or tied up in economics, or tied up in, you know, smoke and mirrors of headlines. It really doesn't have to. Will it be? Of course, because that's just how the world runs. But does it have to be, is what everyone should ask themselves. Yeah.
I think even the whole like illegal immigrant thing, like it's so dangerous to call a person living on this earth illegal. Like, you're a human being, and just that in itself just makes it's so dehumanizing. It makes that person have no autonomy and no human rights because they're illegal. So then that just means that they get so taken advantage of. You get like a lot of women who are undocumented illegal, they get sexually trafficked, or their organs get trafficked, and there's just so many horrible things that they get put through just because of that status of being an illegal immigrant.
It's reversing the dehumanization of the people in the first place, right? Because I think that's a huge thing. I mean, it's a fault that I think exists across all disciplines, not just the media as well, where we reduce people down to statistics. And a lot of the time when we're trying to prove a point, the issue has become that we're trying to say this percentage of people are suffering, you know, this percentage of people are doing this. It's something that we're taught as a way to, I mean, you know, as a way to sort of give our point of view validity or reliability. But and when we tell people stories, the opposite is given. I was like, oh, that's just a bias, and that's narrative. That's one particular side of the story. You don't know the entire side of the story. Whereas statistics are seen as more objective and, away from these biases, when that's not entirely true, as we know, through all our disciplines. But getting away from that, and I think sort of giving the narrative back to the people and seeing that as a legitimate, valid viewpoint. No matter what bias you have, it's still a legitimate, valid viewpoint, because you are human at the end of the day, and we have to validate their experiences, and it shouldn't be down to just statistics, and we have to reverse that dehumanization process. I think that's very important. It's something that needs to prevail in our discourse a lot more than it does at the moment.
Again, I think it comes down to making people comfortable in ignorance. Because if you dehumanize a person, then you, at some point, on some level, you don't hold yourself accountable, or you don't hold yourself, you don't put it to yourself that there is anything you should be doing or could be doing, because
here's your conscience.
They're not even human. Yeah, your conscience is protected. It's like, has nothing to do with me. I can go on doing my life, because you dehumanize them. So no, it's dangerous, and yet it happens so frequently,
easily as well. I don't think we realize how easily that's done.
I think the worst thing is that it garners support. Like, Trump saying all that stuff about Mexicans and the wall is part of why a lot of people, like, it riled people up. It was what a lot of people did agree with, low-key, even though they never said it. So they were like, all for it. And Brexit's the same thing. Like, Brexit was so much more than just migrants can't come into our country anymore. But the fact that was the main thing that was used to, like, spin on why Brexit was a good thing is really scary, because it just shows that so many more people think that it's a problem, and really are against migrants coming into this country even more than they say.
This belief that most people know of, which is that intolerance is very overt in the US, but in the UK just is much more covert. But that's not to say it's not there. It's just very much more subtle, but it's there at every corner and on every single level. It's just a lot more covert. And what's really dangerous about these years of the Trump administration, of these years of Brexit and the Brexit vote, is that a lot of people had these opinions, and yet they would never dare to act on them, because that's not an accepted social norm. But now there's been a shift in which people feel like it's acceptable to be openly ignorant. Like, that's something to be celebrated. It's not something that in the past you would try to work on or you would try to hide. It's something that, people are very vocal about being ignorant or being misinformed or being just, of very simple mind. Like, being simple-minded is no longer something that's like, oh, I'm going to try my hardest to, fix that or make sure that that's not noticed. It's kind of like, I'm simple-minded. Take me as I am. And it's very dangerous, because it's really dangerous, because before, at least if you weren't trying to fix it, you were trying to conceal it. You were trying to be like, I don't want anyone to know that, I'm this simple. And yet you come now, there's such a shift that in this era is kind of like, I can be as simple as I want. I can know next to nothing, and that's okay. And that's really dangerous. That's very, very dangerous. Yeah.
Of course. But I mean, I think our measures as a society as to what success is plays into that a lot, right? Why is Trump seen as successful regardless of how ignorant he is because he has made a ton of money, and he's used that money to gain power. There's no intellectual accountability at all to get into that position, other than the fact that he had money. That was it. That's the only qualifying factor he needed.
Rich, like, he inherited.
That's it. And the audacity that somebody like Kanye West, who might be great in the field that he's in, but he had the audacity to say that he might even run for elections.
The audacity.
It is. I think it's rather audacious. You do not know anything about politics, economics, or you have no qualifying factors. What you either just a simple university degree, if you count that as a qualifying factor. I don't say that people that are university educated necessarily are. That's not my point here. But there is at least experience, right? People like, say, Jeremy Corbyn, that have gone not necessarily educated at like the top institutes, but has lived amongst the people and has cared about the people and has proven this on multiple occasions, that he actually gives, he actually cares about people.
Act in politics.
Right, yes. And so it's not that university, but there should be some qualifying factors for you to be able to attain that position within, some sort of legitimacy. But we gave a person legitimacy because of the fact that they are seen as successful within the mainstream. I think it would be very difficult for people to actually say that he might have been an unsuccessful president, but doesn't necessarily mean he's unsuccessful in other ways, But the definition of success that we've given in this day and age is determined by the fact that we live in a society that is very monetary driven, and people that have knowledge and have, are seen, people that have actual knowledge or any intellectual capacity are written off straight away, and they don't have, and no one else is accountable. And this is why you get such ignorant people coming into office, whether that be here in the UK or in the I think in the UK it's a lot more institutionally played, because a lot of these people that we have in power are Oxbridge graduates or Eton graduates, and but the way and how they got into these positions again is a lot more like to do with the fact that there's a lot of nepotism, and so they have these qualifications doesn't necessarily mean that they did well. That's why I say that university degrees aren't necessarily important, but there should be evidence, at least, of the fact that you have the potential to govern before you are nominated as a president, rather than having the money just to run a campaign election, which is, I think that says everything about the society that we live in. That's all it takes. You have money, you have enough money to run the campaign election, you qualify as president.
Yeah,
it's very sad but true. Yeah.
It was an advertisement-based democracy. That's what I call it. Like, a lot of the time that I see the hatred that is spewing is because we are consumerists and we consume adverts more than anything. And I think a lot of this is coming out in a ton of documentaries. So it's not like this is a hidden fact. Even our social media takes advantage of the fact that we consume adverts. I don't think our politics is any different. And the fact that people have advertised migrants to be aliens and those deported, like that Theresa May, in that Theresa May campaign that was going around, the fact that she had the advert up, and the advert works in the sense that it does sway people. Brexit was an advertisement campaign.
Most people won't actually look into the politics of what this stands for and stuff. And I think me and you had this conversation before as well, Miss Blair. It's like most people will just look at what they're provided with, so like adverts, the small things they'll see on social media, and they'll make up their mind on if they agree with that person or what they think on the issue. And that is what's scary, because misinformation can then lead to someone making stupid decisions.
No, but it's exactly that. It's like how Brexit was marketed. Brexit wasn't an educational, basis. I can. And this may sound a bit harsh, but I can guarantee you most of the people that voted for Brexit are regretting it now. And a lot of the time when how did they come to the decision was the fact that they were given a bunch of statistics about how it's going to help the NHS. But no one actually knew what Brexit really is. What does the EU mean? No one really knew. A lot of people, you're not taught this in school as to what the European Union actually is. What does it mean to be a part of the European Union? What effects does the European Union have on our economics and politics? And what does coming out of it actually mean? How many people know the answers to these questions, yet they're given the voting power to be able to vote for such decisions in the first place? Without the education being there and the actual, when you're actually giving, this is what I mean by giving the education system a reform, where you're teaching kids how to vote. We're not taught that. None of us are. None of us are taught how many of us had political studies as a topic in school, unless it was an option. It wasn't something that's mandatory. Yet you are supposed to make political decisions as a citizen of this country. And this is where the ignorance plays into messing with people's lives, and people don't understand that.
No, it's really well said, because it's so true that we are given, or generation after generation, you're given this responsibility, and yet the people who bestow you with this responsibility have made it so that they don't educate you on just how powerful your vote or your political affiliations will one day be, because as a child you don't think too deeply about it, but by the time you're given the platform to think deeply about it, you don't have adequate enough of a period to make an informed decision. So you just, as most people will do, you just go with what's been regurgitated. You just go with what you've heard in passing, and you've heard it in passing so many times, it must be true. And then when the fallout comes, or when the result of it comes, you start to question, what did I vote for this? Is this what I signed up for? And it's like, yeah, the sad truth is this is exactly what you signed up for. Because I think one thing that a lot of people don't take into account is that our NHS is made up of so many ethnic minorities, and God bless them for being here. That's the long and short of it. Because if really and truly we were to do what these hard-pressed Brexiters wanted and just kick everyone who's foreign out, what would be left? Not just but the NHS to start with, because we're in a global pandemic. What would be left? These people from these foreign nations, they've come, and there's no question of their servitude or their loyalty, because they put their life on their line during a global pandemic to protect you, to protect regardless of our race, our religion, regardless of our origins. They who are seen in the eyes of so many as foreigners or immigrants or migrants, they staked their life to help you. If that doesn't contribute to, being a valued asset in society, I cannot think what does. I cannot think what is. Not at all, I can't.
Then let's clap for them, but still vote for the people that we vote for.
Oh, clap for it.
I think that says it all. Absolutely. Yeah. Leaves no box uncrossed. Yeah, that says everything. It does. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all sort of unfolds as well in the coming years and stuff, and if it'll get better, if it'll get worse. At the moment, it feels like it's a very sort of hostile environment when talking about migrants and stuff. And I personally, it makes you feel uncomfortable being in this country, and even though I was born here and stuff, you do feel more and more othered as well. So it's kind of scary and stuff, but it's more scary thinking about what the future's got in hold, to be honest.
That's a very sad thing, but it's true. I mean, as optimistic as we try and be, and as much as we believe in the people's power, with the way that the trajectory is going at the moment, it is very difficult to see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm of a different vein. I'm optimistic always. I feel like when we live in a world where you can have people like Malala Yousafzai, when you can have people like Greta Thunberg, when you can have people who is not necessarily they come from positions of power, they're just people, and they spoke about something they cared about, and they changed the world. I feel like there's no reason to not be optimistic that there's still people who will speak and they'll change the world. We're people, and we're speaking, and we're going to change the world, because I feel that very often there is this mindset that, what can I do? I don't have money. I don't have connections. I don't have a platform. But at one point, none of these people who have all of that did. They were just people, and they voiced an opinion, or they believed in something, and they put that into the stratosphere, and then there were results. Everyone has some kind of power, because as long as you have a voice, you do have a power. Your voice is your power. It's one of the most powerful tools that we as humans have, the voice, the ability to communicate what it is that is wrong, what it is that is right, according to our belief systems. And of course, the results of that can be really successful, but sometimes they can be not as successful, but that doesn't distinguish the fact that that power always sat there within you. So yeah, so I'm optimistic always, no matter the situation, no matter the travesty, no matter the atrocities that are happening in the world. I'm always optimistic, because somewhere in some place there is somebody who is not necessarily had enough, but is wise enough, bold enough to say, I see it, I want to change it, so I'm going to speak about it. And that's the power that we all have. It's just a shame that not a lot of people think about it or use that power. Yeah.
Let's hope we can use this podcast as a way of
absolutely
doing that positive change within society, and we can all hope that through our future work that we do. I do think that's a very positive and
that's a beautiful way
to end. Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
A really beautiful way to end. And no, it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed this. It was very interesting.
No, ladies, I cannot tell you how, again, teachable moments it is, because a lot of what you said are arguments I've only heard in passing, but again, it just makes you think, and it expands your mindset. So I'm incredibly humbled and really, really thankful that you had me on for this part of your series, and I cannot wait to edit this and put it on, and I cannot wait to have the series all up at the end of the month, because it is talking, is how we affect reform and we affect change, is talking. And yeah, and I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it, and I thank you all so much. I do.
Thank you so much for letting us be part of your series too, and having these discussions as well.
No, you're most welcome. It's been my absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Not yet.